All right, we're going to give it one more minute. Oh yes, someone just asked if we're on mute. All participants are on mute and your video is off. So do not worry. So use the chat box if you have a moment to introduce yourself. Alrighty, I think we'll go ahead and get started. So welcome to the Small Business Legal Basics webinar, everybody. We're very excited to have you. My name is Christina Oth. I'm the project coordinator for Business and Neighborhood Services, and I'll be helping to moderate today. We also have Meg Thompson. She's the director of Business and Neighborhood Services at the city, who's going to be helping us with some tech support and to field your questions. You'll also be hearing from Ruth Jordan. She's the manager of minority and women-owned business enterprises at the city. And of course, our wonderful presenter, attorney Scott Anthony, who helped put together this great presentation for you all today. All right, so just a few housekeeping things before we get started. The presentation slides and recording will be available after the webinar. I'll be trying to send those out in the next 24 to 48 hours to all those who registered. And as a reminder, all participant video and audio is off, so you should only be seeing and hearing the panelists. If you'd like to make any comments, you can do so in the chat box. And also throughout the presentation, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A box. We'll be kind of answering questions as they come in, and you'll also have an opportunity at the very end to get any final thoughts in. And I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Ruth Jordan to introduce our agenda.
Wonderful. Thank you, Christina. Again, my name is Ruth Jordan. I am the manager with the City of Charleston's Women and Minority Business Enterprise Office. We are the division of the City of Charleston's Business and Neighborhood Services, and we're delighted to be hosting this webinar. Each month, the City of Charleston's Office of Women and Minority Business offers free webinars to help businesses scale and grow their business. But more importantly, after the pandemic, it's important that businesses are provided free opportunities for business development. And today we are happy to be offering to you this webinar called Small Business Legal Basics. Our presenter for today is attorney Scott Anthony. Attorney Anthony is the managing partner of law of the Scott W. Anthony LLC and of counsel for Weston, Craig, and Anthony. His practice primarily handles business and fiduciary matters. In addition, Attorney Scott is an adjunct professor at the Charleston School of Law. He's president of the Charleston Village Association, is an officer and a board member of various entities. He lives in Charleston Village with his wife, newborn son, and their pack of dogs. Again, I want to introduce the some and present to others, Attorney Scott Anthony.
Thank you so much, Ruth. It's a pleasure to be here. Like Ruth just mentioned, I'm an attorney here locally in town. I've been in Charleston for about 12 years now. Just briefly on background, my parents my dad and stepfather were both small business owners. My mom actually started one at one point when she was divorced. So I kind of grew up in an atmosphere of small businesses and was very interested in that. I have an economics degree, which I did in college. I did economic planning for the state of Georgia before going to law school. And then I did some work in DC and New York for various entities before settling here and getting back into it. Based on my background with economics and whatnot, I started off doing a lot of business planning, kind of serving as quarterback for people as they started to get off, try to get their business off the ground. Just like being a doctor or anything else, there's really not a one-stop shop for attorneys. You know, we're specialized in different areas, even if we're not technically allowed to call ourselves specialists, depending on what it is. But you know, you're not necessarily going to an oncologist if you've got something wrong with your child, right? You're going to go to a pediatrician unless you know it's cancer. It's the same thing here. And so what I'm going to tell you first off is there is no one generally speaking, there's not going to be one person that can solve all your problems, whether it's certainly not me or anybody else. You know, be sure that you are dealing with people that are have the specific skill sets that you need, whether it's a tax attorney, whether it's an accountant or whomever. Don't forget that there's so much that goes to this. This is going to be a huge overview, kind of a 10,000 foot overview. And I want to remind everybody that I'm not able to provide, there might be an exception, but generally speaking, I'm not able to provide any personalized advice to anyone. If you have questions, I'll have to try to answer them in a general way. That's just because there's no way that I can understand all of your unique situations before providing you a specific answer. I've provided my contact information at the end. I've also provided the lawyer's referral service at the end. That's an organization where you can contact them and they will put you in contact with an attorney that does the work in that field, should you want to talk to somebody other than myself. But just wanted to kind of make sure that was clear before we get started, because I know that is something that, you know, each person has their own personal questions they want to ask, but I won't be able to answer those at this time. Christine, if you can go ahead and go to the first slide, or I guess it's the second one, please. Also, while I see that, if you have a question, like we mentioned earlier, please put it in the chat, and we'll try to get to that as best we can. If you'll just go ahead and right. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of give you a broad overview of what business entities are and what that really means, what's an LLC or a corporation. Kind of talk to you about some of the things you need to consider before making an entity selection. I do not expect this, this presentation today to give you everything you need to make a clear choice as to what entity best serves you. It's just to let you understand that there are different options out there, and each option is unique and will better serve certain people than others. We're going to go over what corporate or company governance, just the documents and the way in which you run your business and the things that you need to consider. We're going to talk about how all this planning is a benefit to you as the founder and the owner. Okay. A lot of people say, oh, I'll do it later. I don't really need to deal with it. Do I? But it's for your benefit. And if you do it in the beginning, then you get to control the narrative of how things are done at your company. Simple things like dress code, simple things like how partners can interact with each other, what happens if somebody's partner passes away, things like that, that you want to have that written and you want to have that word signed off by everybody before you get started. And that's why it's ultimately a benefit to you as the owner, for you to be proactive and to get in front of that. We're going to talk briefly about taxes, licenses, non-compete agreements, other documents that you will have. Again, most of those are going to be specific to your unique needs, but we're going to talk about the different options and how they can help you. Talk briefly about defining the workers and some of the things you need to consider when you're working that, when you're making those decisions. Ultimately, that comes down to you as an employer, whether it's an independent contractor or an actual employee that you're hiring, as to what status you want to give those workers. So we'll go over that. And then as time is permitting, we'll go over question and answer, and I'll try to provide you any information I hadn't previously given you. So a business entity is just this, an entity is anything, right? It's any person, place, or thing basically that is separated from you. And in this case, it's a status that is determined generally by state law. Certainly federal laws will determine that. But if you want to be an LLC in South Carolina and you want to be a South Carolina LLC, then you have to go to the South Carolina statute and see what the laws in South Carolina require of you in order to be an LLC here. Just because you're in South Carolina and you are operating here doesn't mean you actually have to be a South Carolina entity. You don't actually have to form that company here in South Carolina. Many of you might be familiar with Delaware as a corporation state. Very many groups, probably the vast majority of corporations in the United States are actually Delaware corporations, regardless of where they operate. Apple, right? The biggest publicly traded company in the world, headquarters is in California, Cupertino. Everybody's seen it on their devices if they have one, but they're a Delaware corporation. And that's because the laws in Delaware are designed in such a way that benefit corporations. And so many people do forum selection. That is, they pick the forum, they select the forum in which they want to operate out of because the laws in that state they feel are more advantageous for them. We certainly have LLCs in South Carolina. Oftentimes, if I'm doing, we'll get into this later, but as I'm doing asset protection, I often recommend a Wyoming LLC, because there's, even for somebody that's in South Carolina that has no ties to Wyoming, because the LLC laws in Wyoming, generally speaking, I think are more favorable than South Carolina's. So it's important to understand that when you decide your entity, not only decide what entity you want to be, but what situation best behooves you. You know, you've seen a lot of the corporations moving from California to Texas and other states to get better tax treatment or otherwise. All those are decisions that you need to take into consideration before you sign on the proverbial dotted line. Your status is going to determine your ownership rights, taxes, the day-to-day operations, liability, administrative duties. You know, do you have to have annual meetings? Do you have to have a board? Things like that are determined by the structure in which you select, whether it's a corporation or LLC or otherwise. And so it's important to know that and to be able to navigate those minefields in advance and determine which one is best for you. That status, you know, is based on your needs, like I said, and so it can be completely different for each one. For instance, if you are a small company and you might not be ever taking on anyone, well, generally speaking, you're probably going to want to go with an LLC. I can't say that for sure because I don't know your unique situation. But if you're the only one operating as a small business, you might not want to deal with the formalities of a corporation that require annual meetings, require a board, require all these other things that we just talked about, because that just further complicates it. And if you don't need the further complications to protect yourself, the further complications actually can prove to be a huge hindrance for you because it gives you more opportunities to mess up. So some of the business entities that you're probably familiar with, and this is not an exhaustive list, but sole proprietor is probably the most common one. Anyone that wanted to go open a business tomorrow, as long as you had the proper business license, could do that. And you don't need to file with the Secretary of State's office, you know, to form an LLC or to form a corporation. You can just be a person doing business. That's obviously the simplest, but as one of the first lawyers I ever worked with said, simple planning breeds complex results. Complex planning breeds simple results. And I think it's a very profound statement, even with its simplicity, because if you just start operating as a sole proprietor, that's great. You can do it and most people aren't going to stop you. But if something goes wrong, your entire life is exposed. Your house, your cars, anything you have saved for your kids, anything you plan to get from anyone else. If you're in a joint bank account with your spouse or with a family member, that liability could be subjected to that joint account, which means they could have done nothing wrong. You could have made an honest contract breach, and you don't have enough money to cover that honest contract breach where you didn't mean to do anything wrong, but you did. Now you owe somebody $30,000. You don't have $30,000 in your business account. They're going to go after everything they can of yours. There's going to be nothing to protect your life. There'll be nothing to protect potentially your spouse's assets, even your family members' assets, depending on how it's held and how it's used and how that property is available to you. So going as a sole proprietorship, it's easy, but it's a huge risk. What people will do then is then they'll say, oh, well, I'm actually a DBA. I'm doing business as Scott Anthony, but I'm doing business as Scott's Plumbing. I'm not a business. Scott's Plumbing is not a business. I gave myself a new name and I, called myself a DBA. Maybe I've told the IRS I was a DBA. They don't care. It's not going to do any difference for you. It's not going to separate you. And it's still just a sole proprietorship. It's just you and your lemonade stand. And now everything you own is subject to something, any kind of lawsuit that may fall towards you. Okay. And that can be a real problem. It can mess up your licensing. It can do a bunch of other things too. So generally speaking, I say full stop, don't operate as a sole proprietor. Don't operate as a sole proprietor operating as a DBA, because you're potentially going to expose yourself to liability that you won't be able to separate from your own personal life. There are some times where people are not really generating any liability. But most of the case, if you're doing any business, you are generating liability on yourself. Something could go wrong. And even if you didn't do something wrong, the cynic in me as an attorney says someone will sue you. And if they sue you, even if you haven't done anything right, yourself or your insurance company might decide it's a good idea to settle. And there's not anything you're going to be able to do because your whole life is exposed. One of the more common that we hear is a partnership. A partnership technically is two or more people doing business together. You don't have to file a Secretary of State's office. But again, going back to sole proprietor, two partners doing business as is almost worse than a sole proprietorship, because you haven't filed, and now there's two people that are subject to screwing up. There's two people that can present you with the liability of the other one. So what people have done is they've created what we call limited partnerships or limited liability partnerships. Those are entities that have to be formed by filing with the Secretary of State's office, whether it's in South Carolina or otherwise. What happens with the limited, and we'll get into that next, but that creates a layer of liability protection because it creates at least somewhat of a barrier between you personally and you as your business. Probably the most common that people deal with now, or they see, are the LLC, the limited liability company, not limited liability corporation, because it's not a corporation, it's limited liability company. It may not seem like a big deal, but it is. There's a whole bunch of different formalities. Well, I should say, but it is to attorneys. There's a whole bunch of different formalities that go with company or with corporation that don't apply to companies necessarily. And the limited liability company, I would say, generally speaking, is the simplest form of a business structure that you can have that's actually going to separate your personal assets from your corporate assets, or your personal liability from your corporate liability. Forgive me if I use company or corporate interchangeably. I'll try to be very specific when I'm actually talking about the differences, but I may refer to either one kind of in a vernacular. When we look at corporations, that's your Inc., right? That could be your open corporation that's traded as an IPO on the New York Stock Exchange or something like that. It can be a closed corporation. It can also be an S or a C Corp. The S and C Corp is, generally speaking, only going to affect your taxes. The S Corp is basically a pass-through entity, so it's taxed like an LLC. The C Corp is taxed more like a corporation. And of course, nonprofits or not-for-profits are going to fall under that corporation catch-all, okay? You got the next slide for me, please. So this list is, it is an understatement to say this is an oversimplified chart, okay? So take that with a grain of salt, but I wanted to put this out there so you have a little bit of an idea of what I was getting at, okay? So the sole proprietorship, like we talked about, is one person. You have unlimited personal liability because there's absolutely nothing to separate you from your business. Your business is you. If any of y'all have ever dealt with trust, they have revocable trust, which is a trust that people have kind of commonly referred to as living trust. It's the trust that you have while you're alive. It's in your name and it's subject to all your liability. Or you can have a irrevocable, which is a completely separate entity. So if anyone's ever dealt with estate planning or anything like that, that's what we're talking about right now, is the fact that one is separate from you. It's a different tax number, different tax identification number. With the sole proprietorship, it's just you, and it's just your social security number, and there's no one there to help you, okay? I was talking about the partnership. It's basically the same situation unless you structured it differently, and that typical just, hey, two people working together partnership is not going to create this protection. You're both going to have that pass-through tax where it's personal tax. If you move into a limited liability partnership or a limited partnership where you have a general partner and then limited partners, that general partner is going to be responsible for everything, and the limited partners are going to share, generally speaking, in the profits and losses, okay? With the limited liability company, you can have a single member limited liability company, or you can have multiple members, and there's really no limit on how many members you have. The owners are not personally liable. There's an asterisk on that, okay? We're gonna get to it later. But when I talk to people about liability protection, I can't help but think of one of the silliest movies, which is Dumb and Dumber. And for anyone that's ever seen Dumb and Dumber, there's a scene at the very end where the FBI or whomever it is sends him in there, and he's wearing a bulletproof vest. And he says, well, we had you wear the bulletproof vest. And she says, well, what if you shot me in the face? And she says, that's a risk we are willing to take. And that's how you should think about liability protection. There is no magic wand that you can wave that is going to give you absolute protection. It's all about layers. It's all about separating yourself. And it's all about making sure you follow ranks. Because what you're trying to do is not create a bulletproof wall. You're trying to create hurdles. And we're going to go over that later, but you're trying to create hurdles between your business and the assets in your business and your personal life and all those assets. And you're also trying to create hurdles between one incident where something went wrong and bringing your whole business down. Okay. And so, of course, we know about insurance and things like that, but that's what we're talking about when we're thinking about liability protection and what that means. When you talk about the C Corp or the S Corp, as I mentioned it earlier, one of the things I try to make myself remember is that S Corp is self-taxed. And the S for self-tax is personal tax, is a pass-through entity. A C Corp is corporate tax. You're going to pay through the corporate tax structures. Neither one is in a vacuum correct for anyone, right? Just like all of these, it depends on your unique circumstances. And then, corporation nonprofit. The 501c3 and a nonprofit are actually different. The 501c3 comes from the IRS. The nonprofit status comes from your filing at your state Secretary of State's office. Okay, so those are different, and there are different rules for those. Okay, again. Like I said, I know this is a broad overview. Does anybody have any questions about these that are kind of more of a general question that they want to ask? And I'll do my best to try to answer it.
So there is one in the Q&A. Jonathan asks can someone who is undocumented apply for an LLC?
So someone undocumented can apply for an LLC because there's nothing to stop a foreign national from having an LLC in the United States. What you may run into is who is your tax responsible party. The IRS is going to require you to have a tax responsible person. That is someone who is ultimately the contact person. Y'all may be familiar with like registered agents. In essence, it's kind of the same thing, except there's a little bit more liability related to that. Basically, what they're not going to let you do is start a company with no tax responsible partner and nothing in the bank and go out there and do business, because what happens if something goes wrong? You're undercapitalized. You have no way to make someone whole if you do something wrong, either by accident, through negligence, or through outright malfeasance. If you are out there doing something, they need to be able to contact someone to make sure. The IRS doesn't really care if you're, excuse my language, screwing over any third parties. They want to make sure you're paying them. So there's going to be a tax responsible party. So if you are an if you're an undocumented, I apologize, if you're an undocumented worker and you do not have the legal status in order to qualify for that, then you may be in a situation where you have to find someone to serve in that capacity for you, or another business that can serve as your tax responsible party, because there's nothing preventing another business from being a tax responsible party. Okay.
So they asked a question to clarify as a follow-up. If you are undocumented, but you also have a tax ID number, then you could be an LLC?
Yes, you could use that tax identification number in order to serve as a tax responsible party for the LLC. Then you could, and again, I haven't seen the whole situation, but assuming that is, then you could apply for a separate tax identification number for that new LLC, if you so chose. Okay, if that would be in your best interest. Okay.
Okay.
Please remember, there's exceptions to everything, right? And in the law, I tell all my students, it's not the rule, it's the exception. It's not the rules that you see for the IRS for tax, it's the exceptions to the tax code that get you. Okay. So right there, I'm sure there's a whole bunch of exceptions that I just missed. So please take that with a massive grain of salt. All right.
Gotcha. Christina, do you want me to keep going with questions or? Okay.
Yeah, maybe a few more.
Great. Paige asked if you could speak a little bit about an LLC filing as an S Corp.
Okay. So that is just an election that you make. So when you go to file as an LLC, you will do articles of organization. And in those articles, they're articles of incorporation if you're a corporation, but it's in essence the same thing. When you do your articles of organization, you can elect for how you're going to be taxed. When we talk about the operating agreement later, one of the great things about an LLC is that you can choose how you want to be taxed. You still got to pay taxes. There's no way around that. Okay. Everybody still has to pay taxes until you get to be a multi-billionaire, and then you can just take loans off the assets you have, and then you don't have to pay taxes. but that's for a different story. For us peasants, we have to pay taxes no matter what. It's just a matter of how we best organize ourselves to pay the lowest rate legally possible for us, balancing that with how many hurdles we're willing to jump through in order to get that lower rate. Okay, but you just make the election when you file, and that is something that your accountant can do, or you can do when you're filing your own. If you're using a lot of those softwares, they'll give you that option to just check it.
And I want to do
TurboTax is something like that.
do one more question because I'm seeing it asked
Sure.
a couple different ways. Do you need a lawyer, or would you recommend some kind of third party if you're going to form an LLC help you with that process?
So the short answer is absolutely, and that's not because I'm trying to drum up business. I will tell you, anyone that is savvy enough to start a business and has the guts to start a business, I commend you. And I will tell you that there's not a person on this call that I do not think could log on to the South Carolina Secretary of State's website and form their own LLC. I think every single person on this call could probably do that, and they pay the $150. However, I highly recommend you don't do that, because the forming of the LLC, this is kind of an oddity. That's not what provides you the protection. It's your operating agreement, the way in which you operate your company, and the documents that support that provide you the liability protection and the other stuff that will help you separate your personal assets from your business assets, your personal life and your business life. If you think about it, if you go on the Secretary of State's website and you know the answers to the questions, I can form an LLC, just form it in 5 minutes, maybe less. And just click a couple things. And that's not because I've done thousands of them. It's because they ask very basic questions. And once you know the answer, everybody says, oh, it's easy once you know the answer, right? Once you know the answer, it's incredibly easy to file one. And so if you are getting sued from somebody and you say, oh, sure, judge, jury, everything's in my name. I have insurance in my name, my car's in my name, all my tools are in my name, the office is in my name. I saw somebody talking about they are starting a bakery, all this kind of stuff. But I have an LLC in the name of the bakery because I have this piece of paper that took me 5 minutes to form and I paid $150 for it. Sadly, it's not going to give you the protection that you think it's going to give you, because they're going to say, wait a minute. You haven't honored any other formalities. All you have is a single piece of paper that says you're an LLC. How else is your life separated from this corporation or this LLC or this limited liability partnership? Oh, that's it? That one piece of paper? Well, I'm going to say that I don't really consider that a separate entity. And there are plenty of cases in South Carolina where that has been the case, because it's not just the forming, it's the behavior that goes with it. That is why I think it's really important to have someone navigate that minefield with you, whether it's me or anyone else, because again, it's the exceptions. I have to say that over and over again. It's all the little things you didn't think about. And like I said, if the bank account's in your name and everything's in your name, but you've got that piece of paper, it's probably worth about what the paper's written on, right? So the $150 is about the value you're going to get from it, sadly. That's one of the reasons why a lot of times I will recommend like a Wyoming LLC or something like that, because I do think there's some limitations to South Carolina's the appellate court's decisions related to LLCs in South Carolina and corporations in South Carolina. Did that answer?
Yes, I think we'll keep moving on, but keep putting your questions in the Q&A box as you move forward.
So business governance is kind of like the wide catch-all for how you're going to govern your business, how you're going to run your business, what's going to be expected of you and your business. I put over here on the right, this ESG. That is something that is becoming really prevalent in big corporate America right now, right? Talking about how your business is protecting the environment or not protecting the environment, talking about the diversity of your board, how your hiring practices are. Are you being representative of the general population, or are you just targeting, this small strand of the population that's the people that you want to work for you? And you certainly have the right to choose who you want to work for. But as a business, you make money based on your clients. right? You make money based on customers coming back to you, generally speaking. And so it's important for a lot of these big corporations. They're starting to recognize how important it is for consumers that they follow these ESG standards. These are really loose standards. But what that is kind of like setting the tone for how you're going to, it's kind of like a mission statement almost, right? How we're going to run our business. The one we're going to focus the most today is the G, the governance, right? And that's dealing with how a government is governed. And I apologize for being a little small, but I took this off a website, the executive pay, shareholder rights, board diversity, structural audits, things of that nature. That's what we're going to be talking about most today, okay? I've got over here on the left, or on the left, the 4 Ps, the people, process, performance, and purpose. And that's really what your company's about, right? I have in bold operating agreement. If there was one document that I would say is the most important for a business, it is your operating agreement. And I use that kind of as a catch-all phrase to talk about this is the organic document that defines how you're going to run your business, how you're going to operate. Not necessarily how you're going to deal with interactions between a customer, not necessarily how you're going to train an employee, but how you as the owners, the co-owners, are going to run the company. Who's going to make primary decisions? What happens if somebody wants to leave the corporation or company? What happens if you want to take somebody new on? Voting rights. All those things are critical to running a business. And that operating agreement is where you are able to put those down. And generally speaking, as long as it's not against public policy, you can make up whatever those rules are. Now, you've got to check the box, going back to our question earlier, should I have a lawyer help me navigate? You've got to check the box that qualify under South Carolina law or whatever law it is and make sure you're doing that. But otherwise, it's a contract between yourself, you as an owner or owners. That's what an operating agreement is. It's a contract between y'all. It tells y'all how we're going to operate this business. You might have the best best partner in the world, right? And y'all are super excited about your business, and hey, I've known this person for 40 years. We've never had a fight, and we're going to kill it. We're going to do awesome in this business. But things happen, and there are fallouts. And even if you know for a fact there'll never be a fallout with your partner, there's going to be a fallout with an employee. And for those of you saying, well, it's just me and my partner, I've known him for 40 years, and we're not going to have any employees. We're not even going to have a contract. It's just the two of us. One of you, God forbid, may drop dead. And when you drop dead, that living partner, that survivor, now has to deal with who comes next. And maybe the only person that comes next, because you don't have any family, is an estranged aunt who is not very nice and who does not want to play ball with the surviving partner. If you don't have an operating agreement, your company just went poof. It just vanished into thin air. Because if you're fighting over what happens and you go to court and it's two co-owners fighting over what happens, you can't say always. It's like a rule as an attorney. You can't say always, but I will say darn close. The judge is going to say, dissolve the entity and go your separate ways. And there goes your business. Even though you and the partner that just passed away had always agreed that it would carry on in whatever fashion that y'all wanted it to carry on, and y'all had always orally agreed that if you can't prove it, it's not in the writing, that judge is just going to say, look, we're not going to deal with this because if I solve this one issue, y'all are going to be back in 3 months for another issue, and then back again in another 6 months, and then back and back. And you're going to come to me as a judge with every problem you have. I'm not going to deal with that. South Carolina courts are not going to deal with that. They're going to dissolve you. And that's why the operating agreement is so critical, is because it tells everybody where they stand, tells everybody what they can and cannot do, how they can and can't do it. And that is critical, okay? We talked about earlier, the articles of incorporation, articles of organization. Those are the governing documents for how you file. For instance, are you going to be member managed or manager managed, right? Member managed means basically all the members of the LLC, the owners of an LLC are called members. Basically all those members are able to have a voice in that decision. You may end up appointing one as member, the main member, to make those decisions, like a managing member. But generally speaking, all those members will be able to be involved in that. You can have a manager managed, which is where the members are actually appointing a singular voice or co-managers to make those decisions for you, much like you see with like a CEO or chairman of the board, okay? Other important documents, the bylaws. If you're an LLC, you don't have to have bylaws. If you're a corporation, you do have to have bylaws. The bylaws are going to tell you when you have to have annual meetings, where those annual meetings have to be held, what's a quorum, right? All those different things that need to be solved, to be answered by a company in order to be in compliance with their corporate status. Okay. Governing documents are also going to include like documents related to employment status, right? Am I going to have contract employees, or am I going to have actual employees, or am I going to have independent contractors, or am I going to have something else? My sister is a manager of a business in the upstate. And when she took over the job, she said, hey, they don't have like employee handbooks. They don't have this, that, or the other. And I said, well, you need to get them, because you need to tell your employees what they can and can't do. You need to protect you and the managers from ADA claims, right? Americans with Disabilities Act, right? Do we need ramps? Can I hire this person if they can't do this, that, or the other? Can I ask them, are you able to do this, that, or the other? All these types of things need to be thought out and in writing in order to properly govern it. Because if you're an employer that says, I don't want anybody working at my restaurant with a mohawk with purple hair, let me tell you something. I am not an employment attorney. I can recommend a good employment attorney. I am not one. And I definitely recommend you have them help you with your employment manual. But I will tell you this, if the first time anyone in your restaurant knows that you don't want somebody working with a purple mohawk and earrings is when somebody that works there shows up with a purple hair, mohawk, and earrings, and you say you can't wear that anymore, that's the wrong decision. Just to each their own. But from my perspective, that's the wrong decision for the business owner. That should have been laid out far in advance of somebody coming in. You need to have those standards written, and you need to have them written in the way that is legal and enforceable. And you need to know what questions you can and can't ask, and you need to ask them. Because if, as I know people do, if somebody comes in to apply for a job and they pull on your heartstrings and you hire them and you don't ask critical questions and they're not in a position to fulfill the obligations of your job, you're in a tough spot. And if you fire them, you're staring an ADA discrimination lawsuit in the face. And those can be wildly expensive and wildly uncertain as to outcomes. So shooting from the hip and fixing it later is not the advice that I would give you as far as employment or anything else. And that's why the last thing says everything in writing. I'll repeat this, but if you're trying to get someone to sign a contract or work for you, or be your partner, be a vendor, you want to sell to them, whatever it is, if y'all come to terms and they will not put it in writing, you have not come to terms. You have not come to terms. That's a fact. Why wouldn't they put it in writing? If they agree to it and they're happy about it and you haven't coerced them, why wouldn't they put it in writing? The cynic in me says because they don't want to be held accountable when what hits the fan, right? They don't want to do it. And that's why they're not going to put it in writing. And they say, oh, don't worry about it. You don't need that in writing. I'm good. My word is my bond. My handshake is my bond. That's great. That's awesome. But do you know how much harder your lawsuit is going to be? Do you know how much harder it is to sort this out? How much more money you're going to spend? It's not worth it. If you're going to sell somebody, hire something, whatever, and they don't want to put it in writing, move on. I'm telling you, move on. Spent 4 years trying to sell a company. It wasn't my company. I was, serving for the clients. It was their business. 4 years trying to sell it because the person that purchased it gave them a little bit of money, took possession of everything, and then started backtracking on all the promises made. And it wasn't in writing. And so it was a nightmare. It was an absolute nightmare, trying to prove through obscure text messages that was the intent, all that kind of stuff. It's not fun. Okay. It's a nightmare. So get it in writing. All right. Next slide, please. Sorry. Get wound up on the in writing part. Did I miss any questions, Meg?
Just a couple. And everybody, if you could try to put your questions into the Q&A box, I'll scroll up through the chat and see if I can find any, but the Q&A box is really helpful for me. one, since we're on operating agreements, Jack was asking, do operating agreements need to be recorded in order to be enforceable?
No, it's a contract, but you just need to have it signed by the people to which you're obligated. The short rule is if you are trying to enforce a written agreement, it needs to be signed by the person in which you're trying to enforce it against. Okay. So if I'm in a contract with Meg and I've signed it and I say Meg breaches the contract, if she has not signed it, it's going to be much more difficult for me to prove that she was actually a party to that contract. Okay.
And then another quick one, which I think you kind of answered through that story you were giving, but how problematic is it to purchase an existing LLC?
It's not. And I think that there's so, you can purchase just the name and it might not have any assets. What we were doing was an asset purchase where they're actually buying the property, the equipment and the goodwill, the name of the company and things like that, things of that nature they were buying. That can be very problematic. One of the things that people don't think about when they buy it is the liability. And I'm going back to that again, is because if I buy a company, I'll pick on Christina this time. If Christina is going to buy my company and she buys my company and she says, oh yeah, I'll take it. And she says, here's, I'll sell it to you. Here's, 50 grand, I'll buy your company. I say, okay, great. Wow, she's dumb. It was only worth 20. Thanks. I'll take the $30,000 profit. Not only that, she didn't sign any limitation on liability. Now she owns the company. Now somebody comes and sues me and says, 3 years ago, Scott screwed me and he didn't do this. And he owes me $400,000 because he had a breach of contract for 400 grand. If the courts were to go to court, and let's just, press fast forward, and the jury says, yeah, absolutely, Scott's company owes 400,000. Who owes 400,000? Christina does, because she owns the company now. She's going to call me and say, dude, you didn't tell me about this. And I'm going to say, I don't see anywhere in the contract where it says I'm still on the hook for that old liability. You assumed everything, the good and the bad, right? It's like marriage, right? You took the good and the bad, see you later, don't call me. Because there's no indemnity clause, right? There's no limitations on liability. All that stuff is incredibly important for the buyer or the seller to figure that out and to sort that out, okay? That's why it can be problematic. I mean, there's a whole bunch of other things that come with that. We want the agreement because you're buying a company because you think Trader Joe's on 17 in West Ashley is the greatest pawn shop in the world, right? And you buy Trader Joe's, and I don't know this for a fact, but I guarantee Trader Joe's is grandfathered in versus the Trader Joe's grocery store. And they might have that it's not transferable, that it's not assignable, that it's for that one person. I don't know their contract, but I know they got to have something with Trader Joe's, the big, grocery store. And so I go and I buy Trader Joe's on 17 and I'm like, I'm operating. 2 days later, I get a cease and desist from, Clausen and Stobbs or some other big firm down here that says, hey man, we represent Trader Joe's. You can't use that name anymore. That was grandfathered in for the prior owner. You got to change the name. Right? Now I got to go buy new signs, everything, right? All of it changes. That's the stuff people don't think about when they go to buy their company. So make sure you're thinking about all that kind of stuff. People will sell you stuff they don't own. Sure, I'll sell you this. I'll sell you my business. It's 500 grand. Your business is worth 50 grand. Why are you paying? Look at this property I have. Okay, you buy it. Wait, what? You rented this property? People will do that. So you get an inspection when you buy a house. Make sure you're doing the same when you buy property. Okay, or when you buy business.
All right. I think we're going to keep on going.
Sure.
Before we do another round. So thank you.
Sure. So remember, it's protection for you. It separates your affairs. We've talked about that, the liability protection. It's the controls for you and your business owners, your partners, shareholders, members, whatever they're called. Control for the employee, regardless of employment status. So what I'm saying there is, even if they're an independent contractor, you've written down in those governing documents what their roles are, what their expectations are. Are you on the hook for their liability if they are driving to and from work, or if you sent them to Greenville from Charleston, right? And they drive up there and they get in a wreck. Are they on the clock? Are they on the clock at 11 o'clock at night when you pay for them to stay at the Hampton Inn in Greenville to go to some conference and they go get drunk? Are they on the clock? Is your business liable? Those are the types of things that you need to make sure you're thinking about. Are you a wellness professional? Are you doing, like camps where people come for yoga or anything else? Do you have medical waivers that say this is not medical advice? You're taking this on after you contacted with your own physician, and you're not going to hold me liable if you get injured. Those are the types of things that people don't think about, and quite frankly, until it's too late. And so that, again, going back to why I think it's super important to have a quarterback to help you with that. Those documents also control third-party interaction. So if I've got an employee and he goes and opens an account for me at Wells Fargo, he may have what they call apparent authority, which is what a third party would think, yeah, this person seems to have authority. And so Wells Fargo may think, yeah, it's legitimate that he has authority. If I've got it in my document that he didn't have authority to do banking, and something goes wrong, then that employee is going to have to indemnify me as the business. If I don't have it, then the Wells Fargo is going, no. He took out $1 million loan on your business and you're responsible for it. And there's nothing you can do about it. And if you got a problem, then you need to go sue him and prove through court that he's responsible for it. And let me tell you something, your employee is not going to have $1 million, right? Most likely, they wouldn't be working for you. So then you're in a really bad situation in that sense. So these protections are for you. It determines voting rights, succession. Succession, we talked about, super important. Who takes over if that key person's gone? Really important. We talked about the taxes and licenses. A lot of the jobs now, you have to have a specific license. If you're a residential contractor and you're operating as in a business, like an LLC or a corporation, your license, your contractor's license, has to be in the same name as your business. It can't be in your name. If I'm a residential builder, I can't have the license in Scott Anthony's name and then I go do all my contracts in the name of my business. That won't protect me because my license was for me, not for the company, and vice versa. All of these things, make sure you still want to make sure you have an insurance. And what I have here is, these are things, all of these need to be in the name of the company. I think it's the next slide I have, Christina. Yeah. So what we're getting at is the corporate veil. Actions made on behalf of the business entity. Actions made in the name of the business, right? So you're not opening a bank account or doing anything in your own name. You're doing it in the name of that business. Assets, expenses, contracts, all executed by the business. That is signed. The term for signing a contract legally is executing, right? So if you see that on there, that's what they're getting at. They're talking about executing it. And you're not going to execute it as the individual. You're going to execute it as the business officer. If you want to take money out of your business, right? You've got a bank account for your LLC and you've had a really great month, and you want to take some money out that's not part of your salary. You're not going to take money out of your business account and go buy a new car. You're going to take money out of your business account. You're going to write a distribution to yourself. You're going to deposit that money in the bank, and then you're going to go buy the car, because that car has nothing to do with your business. If you start buying stuff through your business account for your own personal life, what have we done? We've blurred the line between our personal life and our business life. And every time we do that, we create opportunity for somebody to come along, sue us, and go after our personal assets. Okay. The corporate veil, talking about intellectual property, you're protecting it in the name of the business. I have in there your name. So Scott Anthony, as president or as managing member on behalf of the law firm of Scott W. Anthony, right? I'm not going to sign it just Scott Anthony, because now I'm on the hook potentially, right? I'm signing it in my capacity as the owner. You want that certificate of existence, what we were talking about earlier, that you get after the articles of organization that says I am a business. What we want to do is layer as well. It's a threshold. Remember earlier, it's a threshold for hurdles, right? The bulletproof vest analogy, it's hurdles. And so one of the best ways we can do that is to layer. Saw some people saying they were bakers, so this was a good, I guess this was a good example. But you might have a company, you want to be a baker, Scott's Bakery, right? That's going to be my LLC, Scott's Bakery LLC, okay? And in that, I might have the name of my business, like the goodwill, any IP I have. Maybe I've registered some recipes that I have so that nobody else can steal them, things of that nature, right? Maybe I've got a really cool title that I've done or a design logo and stuff like that, and I want to protect it. I can have all that IP in an umbrella. Now I want to own an office or a bakery, and I want to buy, let's say I'm buying Normandy Farms on Broad Street. So I want to be down there, right? I very well will buy the business in a separate LLC, and I'll call it Building LLC, right? Probably taken, but assuming the name's not taken, Building LLC. That Building LLC is owned by the umbrella LLC. Maybe then I go and buy several trucks. My delivery fleet ideally would be a separate LLC owned by the umbrella corporation, the Bakery IP LLC. Then the bakery business might end up being separate for a number of different reasons, maybe because of equipment and things of that nature. One of the most common places you see this is with people that own real estate that they rent. If you're a residential rental landlord, you're like one of the most likely people to be sued beyond a nonprofit director. Nonprofit director being the most likely to get sued because there's no one else to name. They name you because they have to. They have to name an officer, so they name you. I have a master's in public administration. That was the first thing they taught us. You're going to get sued. And so other than that, a person that rents real estate is the most likely to get sued because you're always going to have a tenant that's going to get upset about something and sue. So what I recommend for them is a different LLC for every single rental property. Because if they get sued at one rental property, I don't want all their other properties exposed. Let's say I'm renting a $150,000 house, but I have 10 houses of roughly the same value. Somebody slips and falls at my house and I have proper insurance and I haven't otherwise done anything else fraudulent. I want it to be limited to that one house and the insurance for that one house. I don't want to expose all my other investments. Maybe I own an apartment complex that's worth 10 million. Now somebody slips and falls at my little $80,000 house and they're paying $250 in rent a month is now able to sue me and try to go after assets for a $10 million house or a $10 million building because they said that I was completely negligent in the way that I did the wiring and I got electrocuted and now I'm completely disabled and I can't go back to work. Right? It happens. I'm not telling landlords to be slumlords. That's not what I'm getting at. I'm just saying protect yourself, right? We go to the next slide, please. So this is just an outline of the table of contents that I took out of one of my operating agreements. What you will see is oftentimes people will be doing very convoluted business with like a 2-page operating agreement. It's dangerous because there are attorneys used to get paid by the word. That's why a lot of our documents are here too for blah, 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 and a whole bunch of other language that doesn't make sense. And you're like, you could have skipped all that. We used to get paid by the word a long time ago, like Abraham Lincoln attorney style. That's not the case anymore, but we're long-winded now because there's a lot of what ifs. If you don't have it in there, it's a guessing game, okay? And so if you'll scroll to the next one, y'all can look at that in more detail, but everything is covered on that. Voting rights, right? Duties of care, duties of loyalty, the fiduciary duties. I was talking earlier about apparent and actual authority, right? That's what Article 9 is talking about. Those duties that you have to other shareholders, duties to other owners, duties to your clients, etc. How are you going to share profits, distributions, and losses, right? Dissolution, winding up, and termination. What happens when you decide you don't want to operate the business anymore? If somebody passes away or somebody moves to Spain and they can't be your partner anymore, right? How do you handle that? Okay. So that's why you need a robust one. That operating agreement, it's 4 pages for table of contents. I think it's 140 pages. Okay. Because I want to cover everything with the business. Okay. When you hire me, or I will say this, if someone were to hire me to help them with their business documents, especially an LLC, that's what you're paying for. The operating agreement, not forming the LLC, because this is where your protection comes from. Okay. You go to the next one for me, please. I gave you an example of the signature. Y'all can see that. I know it's small, but it says by Scott W. Anthony, its member manager, and then the date. And then at the bottom, I have like what the company is, so there's no confusion. I would prefer, I don't know why I did it this way, but I'd prefer to have Scott Anthony member manager of law firm of Scott W. Anthony. So like if it's yours, Scott Anthony as president of Scott Anthony's Bakery, incorporated or whatever. That way you're not signing an individual like we talked about earlier. You're signing the capacity as the officer, okay? If you do an e-signature, technically you will do \S, / and then your name. That is technically how you do an e-signature, okay? So that's what signifies that it's an electronic signature. I think probably everyone right now has become painfully used to doing electronic signatures in the post-COVID world. Technically, there are some states that will say if you don't have the \S, / it's not a signature. You'll see a lot that are just S \, which I think is fine. But if we're being, we're getting doing real semantics about it, it's \S, / okay? But just so when you're signing things, DocuSign or whatever probably does it for you, okay? The SS4, I just put this on here for you. This is what I will have anyone sign for me if they ever ask me to give them a tax identification number. Because what it says is at the bottom, it says third party designee. That means that I'm authorized by law and the IRS to go fill out and get a tax identification number for you. Without this, no one is allowed to get an identification number for you. The only person that is authorized to get a tax identification number is yourself or someone that you have designated through an SS4. I don't know the IRS would ever come knock on your door, but the IRS is one of those people that I don't ever want to talk to. I'm sure they're the most wonderful people on earth. I love them all. For any of them listening, they're the greatest people in the world. I have nothing but respect for them. I don't want them coming to me, okay? I want to do whatever I have to do to legally let them say, hey, you do your thing, buddy, but I'm not on your radar, okay? And so I won't get a tax identification number without one of these. And so what it does is it allows you to make all those elections on there that we talked about earlier, okay? Like what you're going to be doing for your business. It's pretty straightforward. The second page on that is instructions, but I wanted to put that on there because I think that is important, okay? All right, so we talked about briefly about this, but the big thing is piercing the veil. It's creating a real separation between your business. Generally speaking, no matter how good your protections are, no matter how many corporate formalities you have done, generally speaking, you are going to be at personal risk if you do deliberately wrongful, fraudulent things, okay? Generally speaking, the courts are not going to let you hide behind some fake structure and say, oh, well, I've got this LLC, so now that I'm cheating everybody out of contracts and pocketing all the money, they're generally not going to say, oh, well, just because there's no money in your LLC, we can't go after the tens of millions of dollars in your personal name. Generally speaking, that's not going to happen, okay? One of the best ways that the courts, or the easiest ways that the courts have pierced the veil, is where they have said this company's undercapitalized. That is, if you're taking out huge loans, and this, you've seen it happen with a lot of contractors, developers, they take out tens and 20s of millions of dollars to build a project. And as it's going, they're just siphoning off profits. And then they end up having to declare bankruptcy or say, oh, we can't meet our other debt obligations. And the courts are going to say, wait a minute, why were you taking all these profits and deliberately undercapitalizing yourself? So it's important to, when you operate a business, to be a reasonable business. If you're running low on funds because you're not doing well, that happens. But if you're running low on funds because you're siphoning off profits to avoid debt, they're generally speaking going to undermine your liability protection. Failure to follow corporate formalities, as we talked about earlier, they're your rules. So if you draft a rule that says we're going to meet once a month and we're going to do this, that, or the other, and then you don't do it, that's going to come back to haunt you. If you didn't have to do it, don't make a rule that makes it harder on yourself. And those that you do have to follow. South Carolina is weird. If you've got like one person on an LLC, sometimes they're reluctant to uphold the formalities of an LLC. Again, another reason why I use Wyoming sometimes. But one of the best examples I'll tell you is a little sidebar if I've got time, is there's a thing called a charging order. A charging order is a lien against your LLC for distribution. Okay, you got money in your account, but you owe somebody money. they're going to take a lien against you, right? Just like they would for their house, and they can put it against your corporation. What it means is every time you go to take profits from your corporation, your business, whatever it is, they have a lien so they can reach in and take money out of that distribution. Okay. In South Carolina, they say if they have, there's been multiple court cases, the Supreme Court that have upheld this. Well, I don't know if multiple Supreme Court upheld it, and there's been multiple cases on it. They basically said, hey, if you've got a charging order and you've got a lien on the company, but the company's not taking distributions and they're a smaller company, we're just going to foreclose on that distribution and get your money. Which to me says, well, what is the point of an LLC, right? If they can just shut it down because I'm not paying. But in other states, you can do what you call charging order protections, which is where you say your lien is only valid against any distribution I make. And although anytime I make a distribution, you may be able to take money, you can't force me to have a distribution. And so you could sit there with it in your account, assuming you have the money to do that. Why that's important is, going back to being an attorney, being slightly cynical, it's about trying to get the other side to settle. And if your money is in an account through the business and they can't force you to take a distribution, you owe them money, they might be more willing to negotiate. If they
So,
think
Scott,
they're going to
we're
have to wait. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize what time it was. I'm sorry.
Yeah, we're coming up on time. We have about just a few more minutes.
Okay.
And we got lots of questions we'd like to try to get to. So people hang on. I know this is such powerful, great information. So those who have to leave, the slides will be made available, but we just have a few more slides. But more importantly, I think the information is so powerful that if Scott's available, we're going to continue maybe just a few more minutes.
Sure. Sorry, I was a little, there's a lot to go over, so sorry about that.
Okay.
All right,
So
do you want to go to the next? All right.
So we'll keep going.
Okay. Defining your workers, I'm just going to touch on this really briefly. Defining your workers is how you're going to be responsible for whether it's workers' compensation or any other form of insurance you have to have for that employee, the liability and things of that nature. Those decisions, generally speaking, are made by the IRS and state law. If you want them to be a contract employee, they'll be getting a 1099 or independent contractor. They'll be getting a 1099, and you need to truly follow the rules to separate them from it. Otherwise, they're going to be an employee. Okay. We don't have the time to really go through the details of that. And more importantly, like I said earlier, I'm not an employment attorney, but it is important to understand those differences. If they're an employee, you've got a lot of obligations with workers' comp and things like that that you will not have with independent contractors. However, you can't treat people like an employee and then just slap a label on them as independent contractor, as Uber is finding out readily as they go from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, losing battles over that fight. I know they might have won a temporary one in California, but I don't think it'll last. So we'll just, we can follow up on that, and I can point you on the right direction of an employment attorney if that's what you need to talk about. Okay. You'll go to the next slide for me. Okay. As we talked about it, is all this really necessary? I'm just a small business. It absolutely is. In the words of the immortal Mike Tyson, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And that's what will happen with your business. Somebody will breach a contract, or an employee will do something ridiculous and you never imagined them doing, or that best friend of yours for 30 years will turn out to be somebody you didn't think they were, or you will make a blatant mistake that puts you in harm's way. And if you don't have your plan written, it's not very useful for you. Okay. So have a plan, but have a plan that can get back up off the mat. And that is where your operating agreement, that's where your bylaws, that's where your employment status contracts, all those kind of things, that's where that comes in. If you're, if you're a vendor, if you're a baker and you decide you're going to sell to one of the hotels here, make sure that contract is written. Do you know your obligations? They know their obligations to you. And you know what you need to do in order to be in compliance and to not get punched in the mouth. We'll go to the next one. All right. I'll fix it later is like the common thing. Oh, I'll get to that later. I like to tell people people like to call attorneys when their house is on fire. That's the wrong time to call the insurance company, right? It's too late. You got to call somebody to put it out. You got to call the fire department. You have to plan advance, because the next one is fraudulent conveyance. If you have a bunch of money in your account and you realize, oh man, I just screwed up, my employee just screwed up, we're about to get sued, and you know it, and you have good reason. You don't have to have the lawsuit filed. You just have to have good reason that you're about to get sued because you know something went wrong. If you then come to me and say, hey, Scott, can we move all this to a different LLC to do some of that asset protection you were talking about? I'm gonna say it's too late. I can't, because if I move it now and the courts hold you liable, they're gonna make us unwind it. They're gonna hit you for the fraudulent conveyance, and they're gonna try to come after me too, because it's illegal to do that. Okay, I can do a lot of really cool stuff to protect your assets, but I have to do it before there's a problem, before the fire starts, before there's smoke. Quite frankly, before there's smoke. I see this happening a lot with people. They start one location, it works great. They're there every day, and it works great. And then they say, I want to open a second and third location. You don't have that much time. So make sure all your foundation is laid. You got all your documents in order. You know what you're doing before you try to expand, because you're not going to be able to keep an eye on your baby like you were the whole time. And it's all going to fall through the cracks. And you're going to realize how many things that just worked because you knew what you were doing. That's almost impossible to train somebody else to do. Okay. We talked about the actual apparent authority, securing your IP. I don't know if y'all saw this. You ever heard of Taco Spot? I think it was on Cumming, Spring Street, one of those, right? Taco Spot is an institution in Charleston. It was there as long as I can remember, right? It's not called Taco Spot anymore because they didn't secure their name for IP ever. And even though they were in business for like 25 years, they never registered their name Taco Spot. They're not Taco Spot anymore. Okay, so be really careful about that. My friend's wife, she started a yoga studio. They are wildly successful. But they wasted about $20,000 on material, shirts, signs, and everything, website, because they didn't secure their name. And a company in Texas, was yoga studio in Texas that had like 8 locations, the exact same name, sent them a cease and desist. And she said, well, we're in Georgia. They said, we don't care. It's our name. We're on the internet. You're on the internet. You got to change it. Cost them, like I said, about $20,000 or $25,000 to change everything. Fortunately, it happened really soon. If it happened later, it could have been much, much worse for it. Make sure you're keeping accurate records, taxes, and business. I had a client who wanted me to sue this person for following through on an asset purchase to buy their business. We filed the lawsuit because it was clear that the guy had violated the contract and not purchased it. We got about 6 months into the lawsuit. My client says, why do they want all my tax records? And I said, because you've subjected yourself to the lawsuit, and these are your business tax records, and your business, your representations related to your business are the subject of this lawsuit. And he said, well, we need to withdraw the lawsuit. I didn't ask him anymore because I didn't want to find out the answer. But you have to keep accurate records, because if you don't, either the IRS or the person you're doing business with will come after you. It will not work out well. Okay. Define all relationships in writing. Make sure that's done. Licensed professionals. If you're a residential contractor and your license lapses, you can't do business. If your LLC lapses, you can't do business. I told Ruth there was a case in South Carolina where a guy did about $850,000 worth of work on the house. He sued the residents for not paying him. And he said, hey, the residents knew I didn't have a license. They went ahead and hired me anyway. Supreme Court said, it doesn't matter. You have to have a license. He said, but I actually did the work for him, so too bad. So he didn't get to collect on anything, and he had to pay them money to make some of the corrections to the property. So make sure you're in compliance with all licensing. I just used residential contractor as an example, but make sure you're in compliance with that. Finally, going back, do I need an attorney? Can I do it myself? As the immortal Abraham Lincoln, the person who represents himself has a fool for a client. All right, and that's a fact. That goes for me or anyone else. Speaking of contractors, I'm in a lawsuit with my contractor. I'm not representing myself. Okay, I have an attorney doing it because I'll screw it up, whether by emotions or something else. I'm not doing it. Okay, so I have somebody else. And then, do I have any more slides? Okay. All right. Sorry for keeping y'all a little extra.
So that's fine.
So that's perfectly fine. We have several questions, I know, and want to thank all the participants who are sticking and staying. And so we're going to try to get a couple of these questions. Meg?
Okay, great. So I had a couple of questions along a similar theme here. If you're a single member LLC, do you still need an operating agreement that you sign with yourself?
More so than almost anyone. Because if you're a single member LLC, then all you have is that filing with the SEC or with the Secretary of State's office, right? That's all you have is that $150 filing you have. You need an operating agreement to show that you are honoring the corporate formalities, business formalities, and that you're jumping through those hoops and doing what you need to do. If you don't, of course, you're going to say, great, you have a piece of paper, but otherwise it's just you. So I think in some cases, the operating agreement is great for dealing with your partners. But when it comes to dealing with third parties that aren't part of your business, the operating agreement is almost more important for a single member LLC than anyone, or single member entity than anyone.
Okay.
Not the answer they wanted to hear, I'm sure.
Probably not, no, but a good answer. Here's kind of a general one. Is an MOU like a contract, or are they different?
Yeah, so MOU is a memorandum of understanding. It's a non-binding contract. So I don't really know how that, it's not really a contract. No, it's kind of like, hey, in good faith, we're going to do this, but they're not really enforceable. Generally speaking, they're great for people that are like kind of bigger companies that are not going to waste each other's time. And it's a way of like preliminarily writing down what they want to do, but it's not enforceable. And it's going to be a huge pain to go back. And almost every MOU says this is not a contract, it's not enforceable, or it should. And so really it's writing down kind of a settlement and putting it to words with the optimism of converting it to a contract. Okay. It's just a way to find common ground, but it's generally not enforceable.
All right, again, I'm going to combine a couple questions here. When do I need to get an EIN for my LLC? And does everybody in the LLC need to be on the EIN as well?
No, so you'd have one EIN for the LLC, generally speaking, one for the LLC, generally speaking. You would need to get that prior to filing taxes or opening a bank account. Like they're not going to let you open a bank account in the name of your LLC if you don't have an EIN. Mm-hmm. If they do, then they're going to be asking you for your social security. And there goes that bifurcation we were talking about earlier, right? You've now blurred the line.
Okay. Again, combining here, what is an IP and how do I get one?
IP I'm sorry for not saying that quicker. That is intellectual property, IP, intellectual property. And that is the catch-all for trademarks, copyrights, patents, any of those things that you have that secures your name or your logo, any artwork you've created, recipes, whatever it may be, that's your IP. Okay, the Coke formula, right? The Coca-Cola, like that's their IP. Coke with a little swoop behind, underneath it, that's their logo, that's their trademark. That's all IP.
Okay. I feel like this is something a little bit newer.
And May, can I say one last thing? Go back to that IP. That's what I was saying earlier about making sure that you have those names and secured. Because if your taco spot, the IP for taco spot was their name, yes. Right? Their registered name, and they didn't register it, so they couldn't protect their intellectual property. Somebody else owned taco.
So what I was about to say, this is a little bit of a newer phenomenon. So if you have an Etsy store and you sell crafts, do you need an LLC for that? They're just doing a few sales each month, but.
I will have to defer on that because I do not know what Etsy standards are. But I will tell you this, if I were an Uber driver, I would have an LLC. And I would have an LLC if Uber allowed me to do that. To where my LLC, Scott's Uber Service LLC, was who Uber actually paid and who was actually contracted with Uber. Because then I would keep everything separate, and I'd have a separate bank account. They'd pay me into that, and then I'd take my money out of that. Now you have to balance the ramifications between liability protection and taxes too. So that's why it's hard to answer those questions in a vacuum.
Sure. Let me see here. You mentioned a couple of times that you can create an out-of-state LLC, but someone has heard that they require you to have an in-state address. So they're a little bit confused how that works.
Yeah. And I should have specified that better. Absolutely. So we mentioned earlier, a registered agent. So you could be an out of state, like for Wyoming or Nevada or anywhere else, Delaware corporation. You can certainly be operating in South Carolina as a Delaware corporation. Generally speaking, you have to file with the Secretary of State's office to say that you're operating in the state. Okay. And it's authorization to work in the state, basically. And so what South Carolina is doing is you're filing with them saying, hey, I'm a legitimate business entity out of such and such state, but I'm going to be doing business in this state. And so I want to be registered for that purpose. But you're not actually a South Carolina entity. You're just doing business in the state of South Carolina. But that is important because you're absolutely right. You have to have somebody in the state as your representative. Okay. And you have to have a physical address where they can, for your registered agent. Okay. Your business office could be a PO box, but you've got to have a physical address for your office / a registered agent.
Okay, I've got a couple questions in here about, I may have bought a van or another piece of equipment for my company. How do I write this off as a business expense? That might be a question for your accountant, though.
Yeah, that's going to be a more specified question for your accountant, because each person, first of all, that's not what I do, but secondly, that each person's going to be unique in the best way to do that. Okay.
So for the whole IP sharing a name situation, does that also apply to a nonprofit? Could they be sued?
Yes. Yeah. Because, if you're a nonprofit, you can't just be like, you say something about babies. You can't just be like Owlet nonprofit, right? Owlet, the company that does like the tracking sock for the babies, like something like that. You can't just be like Apple, Apple nonprofit, right? That's still them. People are going to assume that Apple is associated or affiliated with it.
Okay. And then I've got a couple people asking, and I know you might not be able to answer this, but they're asking for a ballpark price for creating an operating agreement.
I can't really give you one on that. I will tell you that I do not charge for consultations, and I try to charge a flat fee for for setting it up based on what you need. So like if you needed an operating agreement and to file the LLC, depending on your needs, then I would create a flat fee for you before we got started. So not just, hourly billing you and you have no idea where it's coming from. And then I try to do the same thing for each, since that's transactional work, like drafting a document, is what they refer to as transactional. In that sense, I try to do, if you needed like an employment contract or you needed a non-compete agreement or something like that, I try to give a flat fee for those. But feel free to give me a call, shoot me an email, and we can discuss it.
Okay. And I feel like Ruth and Christina, some of the other questions I've gotten here are a little too specific. So I'm going to recommend that those people either reach out to Scott or some of the other resources that we're going to share.
Okay, sounds great. And again, I did see one question that I thought was pretty interesting was, if a owner of a 501(c) dies and a 501(c) organization is dissolved, does the property automatically go over to the heirs of the founder?
No, it would have to be distributed in accordance with those nonprofit rules, would be my initial inclination. Again, depending on the governing documents,
Right.
It could go somewhere else. But generally speaking, no. And if it did go to those people, then obviously there would most likely be tax obligations on that money.
Exactly.
Again, that's a more specific that I'd have to kind of see the unique situation.
Great. Well, again, thank you so very much, Scott, for this wonderful presentation. And again, you can contact him. We will provide you with their contact information. And also, Scott provided that South Carolina Law Referral Services is also available. And that link is in your chat box. Feel free to contact and reach out to Attorney Scott Anthony or contact the South Carolina Legal Referral System. Like I said earlier, each month, the City of Charleston's Office of Women, Minority Business and Business Services provide free upcoming business development courses. So our next one is called Doing Business with the Government. That's scheduled for Wednesday, August the 18th from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. Please go and register because businesses are needing to learn how to do business with the government. We will have South Carolina Department of Transportation, Charleston County, the City of Charleston, as well as the City of North Charleston governmental agencies and how to do business with those entities. Again, thank you for tuning in. I hope that you learned a lot. And again, let's thank Scott again for a job well done.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Good.
Yeah,
And
of
so-
course. And just a reminder, I'll be sending out the slides and the recording to all registered participants and hopefully by the end of the day. So you should get it soon.
And also our survey. Don't forget to
Yeah.
complete the survey as well.
Mhm. Great.
So again, thank everyone for being here.
Thank you.
Great. Thank
Scott,
you.
stay on for a quick second.
Okay.
Yeah.